I used to think nightmares were loud, car crashes, house fires, sirens in the distance. But the worst one I've ever lived through started quietly, under bright, harmless fluorescent lights, while I stood in line at a convenience store in Mexico, holding a bottle of water and a pack of gum, pretending I wasn't lonely. I'm telling you this in first person because it's the only way I can tell it at all. If I write it like a lesson, it sounds preachy. If I write it like a warning, it sounds like I'm trying to sound smart after doing something painfully stupid. And if I write it like I'm the victim, I don't sleep at night because I made my choices. No one forced me to get on a plane. No one forced me to sign anything. But I also know how these stories begin. I know how you can be a grown man with calluses on your hands and a lifetime of common sense and still walk straight into something that dismantles you piece by piece. So here it is. Call me Mark. I'm from the United States. I spent most of my life working construction framing, drywall, job sites that started before sunrise and ended when your arms felt like someone had poured cement into them. I didn't have a glamorous career, but I had something I thought mattered more: reliability. The kind of life where you show up, you do the work, you come home, you repeat. I was married for 14 years. No kids. Not because we didn't try, just because life didn't hand us that card. People assume that means freedom. What it actually means is your house gets quieter faster, and once the quiet starts, it doesn't stop. The divorce wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was polite. It was paperwork and sighs and two adults agreeing that the feeling had died years ago and nobody had bothered to bury it. When my ex said, "I think we're just done," I didn't argue. I nodded, like she'd told me we were out of milk. Then I went back to my empty apartment and realized I didn't know who I was without the routine of being somebody's husband. My buddies tried to help in the way guys always do. Beer, jokes, you'll bounce back, like heartbreak is a sprained ankle. But nights were brutal. After work, I'd heat up something frozen, sit in front of the TV, and let the noise pretend to be company. I'd fall asleep on the couch and wake up at 3 a.m., with the TV menu glowing like a blue accusation. Are you really doing this again? One weekend, I opened my laptop and started looking at flights, not because I had a plan, because I needed an exit. Latin America showed up first: warm weather, cheaper living, places where people were outside at night instead of hiding indoors like the world was ending. I told myself I was just taking a trip to clear my head, a reset. I booked a few weeks with a loose route, maybe Colombia, maybe Costa Rica, maybe Mexico. Mexico won before I even landed. I stepped out of the airport in Mexico City and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: motion. People everywhere, street vendors yelling, music spilling out of doorways. Cars weaving like they were all late to the same emergency. The city didn't care that my marriage was over. It didn't care that I was sad. It just kept living. I rented a small apartment in a neighborhood I chose mostly for one reason: it felt walkable. I wanted to be able to step outside and disappear into movement whenever the silence tried to swallow me. The first 2 weeks were easy. Everything is easier when it's new. New food, new streets, new language that made me feel dumb in a way that was almost refreshing. Even my loneliness felt different, like it was traveling too, like it had to learn new shapes. Then the novelty started wearing off. And that's when I did what lonely men always do. I started building routines around places where I might accidentally talk to someone. There was an Ox X01 of those convenience stores on every corner, 2 blocks from my apartment. I didn't even need to go there. There were better shops, cheaper ones. But the Ox XO was bright, simple, and open late, and it made me feel like I had somewhere to be. The first time I saw her, she was behind the counter arguing with a delivery guy. Not yelling, just firm, controlled. Like she'd learned how to make grown men listen without raising her voice. When she turned to me, her expression softened into something neutral and professional. "Buenas noches," she said. I answered in clumsy Spanish, and she didn't laugh. She just waited, patient, like she had all the time in the world. Her name tag said Sophia. She looked like she was in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back. Tired eyes that didn't look sad, just alert, like she was always calculating what could go wrong. I paid. I left. This should have been the end. But the next night I went back. And the next. Not because I needed anything. Because she remembered me. "Americano," she said one night, half smiling as she scanned my bottle of water. "Siempre compres lo mismo." Always the same. I laughed and shrugged, and for a few seconds it didn't feel like I was floating alone in a foreign country. That's how it starts. Not with lust, not with fireworks. With recognition. A week later, the city had a heavy rainstorm that turned streets into mirrors. I walked into the OXXO drenched, and she handed me a napkin without a word. Not a big gesture, just a human one. "You okay?" she asked in English, surprising me. "Yeah," I said. "Just underestimated the weather?" She smirked. "Mexico City teaches you fast." We started talking in small pieces. 30 seconds here, 1 minute there. She'd ask where I was from. I'd ask what time her shift ended. She'd correct my Spanish gently, like she wasn't trying to embarrass me, like she wanted me to get it right. One night, close to midnight, there was no line. The store was quiet. The security guard outside was half asleep. Sophia leaned her elbows on the counter and asked, casually, like it didn't matter, "Are you here alone? Are you here alone?" It should have been an easy question, yes or no, but it hit something in me. "Yeah," I admitted. She nodded slowly, like she already knew. "My aunt," she said. "She says Mexico City eats people who are alone. Not always, but sometimes." Then she added, "You should have friends." I laughed, but it came out thin. "Working on it," I said. She looked at me for a moment, really looked, and then said, "I finish in 10 minutes. There's a taco stand 2 streets over. Safe. Good." I hesitated. Every alarm bell in my head should have been loud. I'm not naive. I'd heard stories. Foreign guys getting played, getting used, getting drained. But loneliness is a liar. Loneliness tells you that caution is the same thing as missing your chance. So I said yes. We walked to the taco stand under wet streetlights and ate standing up, the air smelling like grilled meat and cilantro and car exhaust. She told me she grew up outside the city, that she moved here for work, that she sent money home when she could. I told her the simplified version of my story: construction, divorce, needed a change. She didn't pity me. She didn't act impressed. She just listened. And when she laughed at something stupid I said, it felt like someone opened a window in my chest. Over the next month, Sophia became my routine. Coffee after her shift, a walk through a market on her day off, her showing me how to order food without sounding like a confused tourist, me showing her photos of snow back home like it was some exotic animal. She was warm, but not overly sweet, not fake. And that made me trust her. Then one evening, sitting on my small balcony while traffic hummed below, she said something that made my stomach flip. "Do you ever think you could stay here, like, for real?" I should have said I didn't know. I should have said it was too soon. Instead, I said the truth that had been building quietly in me. I don't want to go back to an empty life. She reached for my hand and squeezed it once. And in that simple squeeze, I felt my brain start writing a story my heart desperately wanted to believe. A fresh start. A wife who still looked at me like I mattered. A home that wasn't haunted by old memories. That night, I went to sleep thinking, maybe I got lucky. And I didn't realize the most dangerous part of this whole nightmare wasn't what Sophia wanted from me. It was what I wanted from her. Because when you want something badly enough, you don't just ignore red flags. You repaint them into decorations. If you've ever watched a man ruin his own life, it usually doesn't happen in one dramatic explosion. It happens in small, reasonable steps. That's what makes it so hard to explain. Because if I tell you, I married a woman I barely knew in a foreign country and it went bad, you'll think I'm some reckless idiot. But when you're inside it, every step feels logical. After that first late-night taco stand, Sophia and I started seeing each other in daylight, which made it feel safer. More normal. Less like the kind of story you hear in a bar and shake your head at. She'd finish her shift at OXXO, and we'd meet in a park near Roma Norte where people walked their dogs like the world was peaceful. She'd teach me Spanish words I couldn't roll off my tongue. I'd teach her dumb English phrases she found hilarious. She wasn't the kind of woman who threw herself at you. That was part of the trap. No constant "I miss you" texts. No over-the-top compliments. No "my king" nonsense. She felt grounded. When she touched my arm, it wasn't sugary. It was casual, like she was checking if I was real. When she said she liked me, it came out almost reluctantly, like she didn't trust herself to say it too strongly, and that made me trust her more than I should have. A few weeks in, she invited me to meet her cousin at a small family lunch. Nothing fancy. Plastic tablecloth, loud TV, a pot of something simmering in the kitchen. Her cousin's little kid climbed onto my leg like he'd known me forever. At one point, Sophia disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a plate she'd made just for me. Less spicy because she remembered I'd coughed the last time. That tiny detail hit me harder than any flirtation could have, because it felt like care, and I hadn't been cared about in a long time. My friends back in the States didn't understand Mexico City. They'd text things like, "Be careful down there," like I was living in an action movie. But the truth is, the city didn't feel dangerous. The danger was how quickly I started building my whole day around one person. Sophia would stop by my apartment after her shift just for a minute and stay for hours. She'd sit on my couch and scroll through her phone while I cooked. She'd point out what I was doing wrong. Too much oil? Not enough salt, and laugh when I pretended to be offended. Then one night, she didn't leave. It happened naturally, like it wasn't even a decision. She fell asleep with her head on my chest while we watched some show in Spanish that I barely understood. In the morning, she stood in my kitchen wearing one of my t-shirts, making coffee like she belonged there. I should have paused right then. But what I felt was relief. That apartment had been echoing. It had felt like a waiting room, like I was stuck between the life I'd lost and whatever was next. And suddenly, it had a second toothbrush in the bathroom, a hair tie on the counter, and a voice saying good morning. The first time she called me, "Mi esposo," as a joke. My husband? I laughed, but my stomach flipped. Because part of me wanted it. That's the embarrassing truth. I wanted someone to claim me again. I wanted to stop feeling like an extra in my own life. A month later, she brought up marriage like it was practical, not romantic. Practical. In Mexico, she said, people don't like living together without being serious. My family, they talk. I don't care what people talk about, I said. She shrugged. I do. Then she added, softer, and if you want to stay here long term, being married makes things easier. Residency, paperwork, everything. That's another thing you need to understand about me. I'm a construction guy. I'm a solve the problem guy. If marriage became part of the solution, my brain treated it like a blueprint. I started looking up visas, residency, what it would take to live in Mexico without feeling like a temporary visitor. The internet is full of confident strangers who make complicated legal things sound simple. A lot of them said the same thing: marriage makes life smoother. And Sophia, smart, calm, always reasonable, kept framing it like that. Not like a fairy tale, like a step, so I convinced myself I was being responsible. We got closer fast after that. She started staying most nights. She started organizing my apartment like it was a project. She'd fold my clothes the way my ex-wife used to, and instead of feeling weird about it, I felt taken care of. And then she showed me a side of herself I hadn't seen. Not cruel, not aggressive, protective, jealous. If I mentioned a waitress being friendly, she'd go quiet. If my phone buzzed, she'd glance at it too fast. Once when I told her I was going to grab a beer with a couple of expats I'd met, she frowned and said, "Why do you need them? You have me." It wasn't said like a threat, it was said like a fact, and I told myself it was love. When you've been starving, you don't criticize the first meal you get, you just eat. 2 months after we met, I bought a ring, not a big one, something simple. I proposed in a small part because I didn't know how to do romantic anymore. My voice shook, my hand shook. I said something like, "I don't want this to be temporary." She cried. She said yes. And for a few days, I felt like the luckiest man on earth. Like I'd skipped the messy part of healing and landed straight in a new life. We got married at a civil office, simple paperwork, a small room, 2 witnesses. Her cousin took photos on a phone. I wore a button-up shirt that didn't quite fit right. Sophia wore a white dress that looked like she bought it the day before. When they said we were married, she squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. And I loved that it hurt, because it felt real. After the wedding, her family treated me differently. More respect, more expectation. Her mother hugged me longer. Her uncle slapped my back and called me compadre. And with every smile came an invisible message. You're part of this now. At first that felt beautiful. Then it started feeling heavy. Because once we were married, the conversations changed, not immediately, subtly. Sophia started talking less about her job and more about our future. A better apartment, a safer neighborhood, a small car, maybe a little business, something for us. And every time she said, "for us," my brain relaxed. Because us sounds equal. But here's the detail. I didn't understand until later, when you're the one with the money, us can become a weapon. Sophia didn't ask for cash at first. She asked for help with paperwork. She said she could help me open a Mexican bank account so rent payments would be easier. She said she could help me avoid fees and exchange rates. She said it would be smarter to keep money local. I liked that she was helpful. It made me feel like we were a team, so I went with her to the bank. She did most of the talking. The banker smiled at her like she understood everything. I nodded along, catching maybe 60% of the Spanish. Sophia kept translating, but it was always fast, then always, "Don't worry, it's normal." I signed what she pointed to. Then she said, "It's better if both our names are on things now. We're married." That line did something to me, because it sounded mature, responsible, like we were doing it the right way. So I said yes. I added her. And that was the moment the entire tone of my life shifted, quietly, invisibly, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. I didn't realize it yet. I was still smiling in photos, still telling myself I'd found a second chance. But in the weeks after the wedding, I started noticing strange little changes. She'd hold my phone a little longer when she helped me with apps. She'd remember passwords I didn't remember giving her. She'd ask about my savings more directly, as if the number mattered in a way it hadn't before. And one night, lying in bed, she traced her finger across my chest and said, softly, almost sweetly, "We don't have to worry anymore, right? Because you have money." I laughed like it was nothing. But I felt something twist inside me. Because in that moment, I realized she wasn't just talking about comfort. She was talking about access, and I was too deep in the dream to admit what that might mean. Marriage is supposed to settle things. That's what everyone tells you. Once you're married, the chaos quiets down. The doubts fade. Life becomes predictable in a good way. Two people facing the world together instead of circling each other, wondering who's going to leave first. That's what I thought would happen. Instead, the moment the papers were signed, the ground shifted under my feet. It didn't happen with yelling or drama. There was no sudden cruelty, no villain reveal. If anything, Sophia became calmer, more confident, like someone who finally knew where she stood and where I stood. The first real change came when she quit her job. She didn't announce it dramatically. One afternoon, while we were eating lunch at a small place near our apartment, she said, almost casually, "I told my manager today I'm not coming back." I looked up from my plate. "What? Why?" She shrugged. "I don't need to work there anymore. I'm married now." It wasn't said arrogantly. It was said like stating a fact, like saying the weather had changed. I remember feeling a flicker of panic, then immediately crushing it. "You're married," I told myself. "This is normal. Couples adjust. I just figured," she continued, "I can focus on us, on building something better." That word again. Us. I nodded, smiled, told her it made sense. Inside, I was doing math. Her income wasn't much, but it was something. Without it, everything depended on me. My savings, my pension, the money I'd brought down to Mexico thinking it would last years. That night, I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers longer than I should have. I didn't tell her. I didn't want to seem controlling, or cheap, or scared. A few days later, she brought up the idea of upgrading our apartment. "This area is okay," she said, walking through the living room, "but it's noisy and not very safe at night." I knew that wasn't entirely true, but I didn't argue. She showed me listings, better buildings, gated, with security, with rent that was nearly double what we were paying. "I'll feel more comfortable there," she said, "and so will you." I wanted her to feel comfortable, so we moved. The new place was nicer, no question. Clean hallways, a view of the city, a front desk where guards nodded when we walked past. It felt more like the life I'd imagined when I came to Mexico. But with the higher rent came a subtle shift in power. Sophia started handling more things, talking to the landlord, paying utilities, managing the household expenses. "It's easier if I do it," she'd say. "You don't speak Spanish well enough." That was true. And that truth became a lever. She'd say, "I took care of it," more often, or "Don't worry about it, I already handled it." At first, I was grateful. Then I realized I didn't actually know what she was handling. Whenever I asked for details, she'd smile and say, "Trust me." And I did, because that's what husbands are supposed to do. Then came the business idea. She didn't present it as a demand. She framed it as a dream. One day, she said, sitting beside me on the couch, "I don't want to depend on you for everything. I want to contribute." That line disarmed me instantly. She talked about a small business. Nothing crazy, something local, something she could manage. She said it would give us stability, independence, pride. She'd already researched it, already talked to people, already had numbers. I didn't realize then how carefully those conversations were timed. Always after a good day, always when I was relaxed, always when I was feeling like a provider instead of a target. "Foreigners can't own businesses outright in Mexico without jumping through hoops," she explained that calmly. But because she was Mexican, because she was my wife, it would be simpler to put things in her name. It's just paperwork, she said. It doesn't mean anything. I hesitated. Just a second. Then she touched my hand and said, "Do you trust me?" And I hated myself for how quickly I answered, "Yes." So I transferred the money. A lot of it! More than I was comfortable admitting to myself. At first, everything seemed fine. She was busy all the time. Always at the business. Always exhausted but smiling. Always telling me stories about progress and plans. But I noticed I was no longer welcome there. "You don't need to come," she'd say. "You'll just get bored." Or, "It's easier if I focus." Then came the nights she didn't come home on time. She'd text, running late, then still busy, then nothing. When she finally walked through the door, she'd smell different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. A perfume I didn't recognize, a confidence that didn't include me. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what people say when they don't want to face something. The truth hit me by accident. One afternoon, I decided to surprise her. I brought coffee and food to the address she'd told me the business was at. The place was closed. Not closed for the day, closed. Empty, windows dark, dust on the glass. A "For rent" sign taped crookedly inside. I stood there for a long time, convincing myself I had the wrong address. I didn't. A woman nearby told me it had been empty for months. Months! That night, Sophia came home smiling, talking about a great day. I nodded. I smiled back. And after she fell asleep, I did something I'd never done in my life. I looked at her phone. I didn't go searching for proof. I didn't want to be right. But it was all there. Messages, photos, plans. Another man. Older than her. Wealthier than me. She called him mi amor, the same way she called me that morning. They talked about money the way couples talk about groceries. Casually, confidently, like it was expected. They talked about me, not by name, just him. Like I was furniture, like I was a phase. I sat on the edge of the bed until the sun came up, watching my wife sleep, trying to understand how someone could feel so familiar and so completely foreign at the same time. When I confronted her, she didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly. Just a short, tired laugh like she was done pretending. "You really thought this was love?" she asked. I remember my hands shaking, my voice barely working. "What was it then?" She looked at me the way you look at someone who doesn't understand the rules of a game. "An opportunity." That word erased everything. The dates, the wedding, the promises. She told me there was no easy way out, that everything was in her name, that I'd never win if I tried to fight it, that making noise would only make things worse for me. She wasn't threatening. She was informing. That's when I understood the nightmare part. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was trapped. And the woman I married knew it. There's a moment after everything collapses when your mind goes strangely quiet, not peaceful, just empty. That's where I lived for days after the confrontation. Walking through our apartment like a ghost, touching furniture I'd paid for, walls I'd chosen, a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. She came and went as if nothing had changed. Sometimes she brought groceries. Sometimes she didn't come home at all. When she did, she acted normal, too normal. "Did you eat?" she'd ask, like a caring wife. I stopped answering. I couldn't tell if she was trying to confuse me or if she genuinely didn't care anymore. Either way, it worked. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The woman I'd married was still there physically, but everything that made her feel human to me was gone. I considered confronting her again, demanding answers, threatening lawyers. Then I started learning how things actually worked. I spoke to an expat I barely knew, a guy who'd been in Mexico for years. Over beers, I told him part of the story, not everything, just enough. He didn't look surprised. "Man," he said quietly, "if everything's in her name, you're done." "What do you mean, done?" "I mean legally, practically, emotionally. You're not going to win this here. Best case, you lose money. Worst case, you lose your freedom." That word hit harder than anything else. Freedom. I started asking questions I should have asked months earlier. About marriage laws, about property, about accusations, about how fast a foreigner can become the villain if the story is told the right way. Every answer pointed in the same direction. I was exposed. She knew it, and she used that knowledge like a weapon. One night, she came home and sat across from me at the table. "I need money," she said, just like that. "For what?" I asked. She listed something vague. "Family, business, opportunity." I laughed. I couldn't help it. No, I said. I'm done. Her expression didn't change. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She leaned forward slightly and said calmly, "If you don't help me, I'll tell people you abused me." I stared at her, trying to find the woman I loved in her eyes. She said it again, slower, like explaining something to a child. "I don't want to, but I will, and people will believe me." That's when fear finally arrived. Not fear of losing money, fear of being trapped in a story I couldn't control. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I ran through scenarios over and over. What if she went to the police? What if she went to immigration? What if she went to my family? My employer back home? I thought about fighting. Then I thought about surviving. The idea of leaving started as a whisper in my head. Then it became a plan. I contacted someone discreetly, an investigator, someone who knew how things worked, someone who'd seen this before. He didn't sugarcoat it. "You need to go," he told me, quietly, quickly. "What about my money?" He shook his head. "Consider it tuition." That hurt, but not as much as staying. The plan was simple. Withdraw what little I could, take only what I needed, leave when she wasn't home. No confrontation, no goodbye. Running felt humiliating, but staying felt like slow death. The night I packed, I moved carefully, quietly, like a thief in my own life. One suitcase, the same one I'd arrived with, full of hope. I looked around the apartment one last time. Our wedding photo on the wall, the couch where we'd laughed, the kitchen where we planned a future that never existed. I didn't feel anger, I felt exhaustion. I left a note, short, final, not cruel, not pleading, just truth. I walked out before sunrise. The city was still asleep, streetlights humming. A stray dog watching me drag my suitcase down the sidewalk. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. I couldn't. The flight home felt unreal, like time was folding back on itself, like I was undoing months of my life with every mile in the air. I stared out the window and tried to understand how something that felt so real could disappear so completely. When I landed, the cold hit me first, then the familiarity, then the shame. People asked questions, I gave short answers. Didn't work out. Too complicated. Not what I expected. No one pushed. But at night, alone, the questions came back. Was any of it real? Did she ever care? Was I just a wallet with a pulse? The money hurt. Losing it stung in a way I still feel when I check my accounts. But the deeper wound was trust. I didn't just lose savings. I lost the version of myself who believed love could start over anywhere. I spent months rebuilding basic things. Sleep, routine, sanity. Some nights, I replayed conversations, searching for signs I missed. Some mornings, I woke up grateful I'd escaped. Both things can be true. I didn't get justice. She kept what she took. She moved on. And for a long time, that felt unbearable. But slowly, something shifted. The fear faded. The anger softened. What remained was clarity. I stopped asking why she did it. I started asking why I ignored my instincts. Why I rushed. Why I thought being needed was the same as being loved. I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't just want a partner. I wanted redemption. I wanted to feel chosen. And I'd paid for that illusion with everything I had. I don't tell this story to blame her. I tell it because I know how easy it is to confuse attention for affection when you're lonely. How easy it is to believe a fantasy when it's wrapped in warmth and promises. How hard it is to walk away once your life is entangled. I survived because I left when I did. Some people don't. And that's the part that still keeps me up at night. When I finally landed back in the United States, I didn't feel relief the way I thought I would. I felt hollow. The airport was clean, familiar, predictable. People moved with purpose. Couples reunited, families hugged. I stood there with one suitcase, the same one I'd arrived in Mexico with months earlier, except now it felt heavier somehow. Not because of what was inside it, but because of everything I'd left behind, or lost. Friends asked how Mexico was. I gave safe answers. Different. Not what I expected. Didn't work out. No one pushed. Most people don't want the truth when the truth is uncomfortable, and honestly, I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Saying it would make it real. Saying it would mean admitting how badly I'd misjudged everything. The first few weeks were the hardest. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I was still there, that I'd hear her footsteps in the hallway, that she'd walk in smiling like nothing ever happened. that she'd ask me if I wanted coffee, then reality would settle back in. Silence. I started unpacking my life slowly, canceling accounts, closing loose ends, looking at bank statements I didn't want to open, seeing numbers that told the story better than words ever could. I'd lost more than money. I'd lost certainty. I'd lost confidence in my judgment. I'd lost the part of me that believed good intentions were enough. For a long time, I wanted someone to blame. Her, the country, the situation, even myself. But blame doesn't rebuild anything. Understanding does. I replayed the early days over and over in my head. The way she looked at me when we met, the way she spoke about family, the urgency, the speed, how fast everything moved once commitment was on the table. I realized something important. Nothing I experienced was sudden. It only felt sudden because I ignored the pacing. Real connection grows slowly. It has friction. It has questions. It doesn't rush you toward irreversible decisions before trust has time to form. What I had wasn't love that grew. It was love that accelerated. And acceleration always feels exciting until you crash. I also had to face something harder. I didn't go to Mexico just for love. I went because I wanted to feel relevant again. Back home, I was invisible. Divorced. Older. Predictable. I didn't stand out to anyone. In Mexico, suddenly I mattered. I was listened to, valued, admired. That's intoxicating and dangerous. I confused appreciation with affection, need with love, gratitude with commitment. I don't say that to shame myself. I say it because I know how common it is, especially for men my age. Especially when loneliness sets in quietly over years. I thought marrying a Mexican woman would be easy. I thought love would smooth over cultural differences. I thought being generous made me safe. Instead, generosity made me exposed. I also learned something about power. Money isn't just money when there's a massive imbalance. It becomes leverage. It becomes expectation. It becomes entitlement if boundaries aren't set early and clearly. I never set them. I thought love meant trust without conditions. What I know now is that love without boundaries isn't love. It's vulnerability without protection. Months passed. The shock faded. The anger dulled. The shame lingered longest. That's the part people don't talk about enough. It's not just losing money. It's losing dignity. It's wondering how many people would laugh if they knew the full story. It's questioning your intelligence, your instincts, your worth. I started therapy. That helped. Not because it erased what happened, but because it reframed it. I wasn't weak. I was human. I wasn't foolish. I was hopeful at the wrong time with the wrong person, and hope, without patience, can be expensive. Slowly, I rebuilt. I got back into routines. Exercise, work, small pleasures. Coffee in the morning without checking my phone. Evenings that felt quiet instead of empty. I stopped romanticizing what I'd lost. I started appreciating what I'd saved. My freedom, my ability to start over, my life. I've been asked if I hate her. I don't. Hate would keep her too close. I don't forgive what she did, but I understand the system that allowed it. Poverty, opportunity gaps, and desperation create situations where morality becomes flexible. Understanding that doesn't excuse behavior, but it helps me let go of bitterness. I don't tell this story to scare people away from Mexico. Mexico wasn't the problem. I was. Or more accurately, my expectations were. There are genuine people everywhere. There are also predators everywhere. Geography doesn't change that. Power imbalance magnifies it. If there's one thing I wish I could tell the man I was when I first booked that flight, it's this: slow down. Don't rush commitment because you're afraid of being alone. Don't confuse intensity with intimacy. And never put your entire life, financially, legally, emotionally, into someone else's hands just to feel loved. I still believe in love. But I believe in earned trust more. I believe in love that doesn't need saving. Love that doesn't require secrecy. Love that doesn't come with threats or leverage. Love that exists even when money is removed from the equation. I thought marrying a Mexican wife would be easy. What I learned is that marriage anywhere is only easy when it's built on truth. Everything else is just a story waiting to collapse. If you're listening to this and considering starting over abroad, I'm not telling you not to go. I'm telling you to go with eyes open. Protect yourself. Respect the culture. Learn the laws. And most importantly, don't give your entire future to someone who hasn't earned it yet. I survived. Some people don't. And if my story makes you pause for even a moment before making a life-altering decision, then telling it was worth it. That's all I wanted. That's all I have left to give.